Welcome everyone to the Startup Grind talk show. We're running this until about 6:20 today. We're going to be covering product pitfalls with two incredible founders, Bhavin Turakhia and Phil Morgan. Both of them are founders. Bhavin is a founder of a company called Flock and Zeta. Flock is a team messaging and collaboration tool, and Zeta provides full stack integration and infrastructure for neobanks. Phil is the founder of HardSoft, which is providing an innovative leasing model, which enables early stage businesses to access hardware and scale efficiently. We are going to be taking questions. So if you go to slido.com and put in the hashtag Startup Grind, we will see questions coming in from you guys. But welcome, Bhavin and Phil. Hey guys.
Hi, lovely to be here. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Marianne.
Awesome. Cool. So, I mean, let's kick off with a pretty juicy question in terms of like your products, what you built for your customers. As a tech company, you deliver a lot of value for your products. So the question is, what did your product look like when you first launched? I mean, Bhavin, maybe you want to take this one.
Well, I mean, I've founded a series of companies, and Flock and Zeta are kind of very different in terms of the audiences they serve and the way we kind of handle product management there. But I would say, frustration is the genesis of entrepreneurship, I always say. So in many ways, the areas that I kind of operate in, so Flock is in the kind of collaboration, communication, productivity space, and Zeta is in the payments and banking space, are both areas that I'm passionate about because I'm frustrated about the status quo there. A lot of the mistakes that I made actually in my product management history have all been around Flock in many ways, because I had done a bunch of stuff, like we built out a bunch of product capabilities and features that, really in hindsight we didn't need. So we've had to pivot a couple of times, but now I think we've got a messaging product and then an email calendar contacts product for small businesses today.
So Bhavin, how did you end up building something that you say you didn't need? So how did you find yourself in that position?
Yeah, I think that I keep, when people ask me what are some of the biggest mistakes you made in your entrepreneurial career, I always say that it's always been around building stuff that nobody needed, because I had huge conviction that everybody's going to need this, and not spending enough time on validating it. And this is sort of early days, but I've learned a lot of lessons along the way, just burning resources on stuff that wasn't relevant. Now we kind of do have well, not just we, the industry as a template in many ways, but whenever I think of a business, I think of it now kind of going through 4 phases, which is, I call it pre-discovery, discovery, scaling, and steady state. And so in the pre-discovery stage, my goal and objective is to really, I have an idea, let's say messaging or email or, banking or whatever it is. I have an idea, but I have to sort of validate certain aspects to even decide whether I'm going to pursue that idea as a business. And I'm really trying to validate essentially, I call it kind of a mini pre-discovery plan comprising of, I'm trying to validate who's the target persona. I have a hypothesis on the problem they have. Is that problem really there and big enough? I have a hypothesis on my solution, but is my solution going to really add 10x value to them? I could have a great solution for a great problem, but do I have a traction channel or a go-to-market strategy that allows me to get these customers? Is there a way to make revenue? So can I make money from these guys? And the last element is, what's the moat? If I do build this business, can I sustain it, or will some other competitor come in and essentially, take it away? And there is a reasonable amount of time now that I end up spending on, me along with the team, end up spending on first going through this pre-discovery stage to actually validate and answer these questions to a certain level of satisfaction before we move on to MVP, PMF. And all the other good stuff.
So Phil, with HardSoft, did you have a similar experience? Did you launch the right thing straight away, or did you find that your service was changing over time?
I think we may have a slightly different long tail to it. So we've been around 20 years, but traditionally, so we're an IT company that deals with finance. So speaking on the finance products side of things, we've moved and changed. So traditionally, leasing is a finance product for startups and established companies. It's been very difficult to get it over the line for a lot of startups. So we've had to be much more forward thinking, I think. And we're certainly in the UK, probably the only people doing for anything from, a few PCs or Macs through to hundreds of them for startups. So what we've had to change ourselves is the product, as in the finance product. So we've moved very much towards a much more flexible system. So we've seen even through COVID that, you know, there may be a business that wants to get rid of all their desktops and take on their take laptops, and we've also customers are concerned about committing to 3 years. So we've changed our product as we've gone along, and that's pretty much either us getting it wrong and throwing things out to the market, or listening to customers and saying, well, you know, that's a barrier to entering into a contract. Can I have a smaller contract? So our product's very different to Bhavin. Is a finance thing that we definitely, over 20 years I've been doing this, we've had to, it's very different from what it looks like not only 20 years ago, but even in the last 6 months with COVID, we've introduced 2 brand new finance products that are completely different to anything on the market.
And Phil, how did you, those 2 new products, how did you validate those? Did you manage to validate them quickly, or did you just take the risk and just put them out to market?
I think one is using probably my knowledge as an older founder who just had his 50th birthday. So, you know, I've got 25 years knowledge as running a business, and I'm trying to put in my fear factor coming out of something, you know, a recession or a pandemic. You know, it's just, for a lot of people, it might be their first one they've ever done. So trying to put that on there and actually then putting it into the market. And a very simple thing is, you know, put some new products on our website. What's the traction? Are we getting them into the shop? Are they looking at that particular product, or are they looking at something else? So, you know, heat mapping and testing with the digital guys, and just making sure that actually follows through. And then what's the customer journey? Do they select that? Do they really want that? Or do they go back to the kind of old-fashioned 3-year lease and own it for £1 and that sort of thing? So, you know, you've got to be brave enough to put some new products on there, but you've also got to be brave enough to take them away if they're not working.
You got to strike the balance. I mean, Bhavin, how do you strike the balance between like controlled risk, in terms of understanding the risk you're taking and about validating things, but moving quickly?
I actually think that they're not mutually exclusive. They tend to be mutually exclusive probably in early stages when you're starting out. I will say that, you know, there are a few people who might have great intuition, can build great products, but if you want to build a scalable company with hundreds of product managers, and we're, you know, I've been in sort of all these environments across, you can't do it without creating that discipline of at least trying to validate. And these days you have so many tools to create, like fake doors, do instant customer surveys, you know, launch quick prototypes that are, you know, quick and dirty and throw away code. You have so many tools and capabilities available that you can actually validate stuff pretty rapidly. So typically I've found that in the product life cycle, you know, the first cycle might take a little longer because you have to put your instrumentation in place for measuring data collection, data gathering, etc. You know, but once you've put your instrumentation in place, it's marginal amount of effort to actually validate each subsequent feature reasonably in advance, or at least get some level of conviction through, you know, putting tiny bits out there or talking to customers before you get there. So they don't necessarily be mutually exclusive.
So maybe a good time to turn to Slido, because someone has a question which might be related to this actually. So from Richard Kaiser, which documented pre-discovery process, so the pre-discovery that you talked about, Bhavin, is quote unquote best practice? And they've given an example of Antler, which is an accelerator in London, but I don't know if you've got views on what that pre-discovery process looks like to you.
So I must admit that, you know, while I spoke about my pre-discovery framework, I'm not really leveraging or using any kind of well-known process. This is just lessons learned along the way. And as I said, the goal and objective is that typically most people, you know, as entrepreneurs, as product heads, start out with an idea of a problem. More often than not, you find that, you know, that problem is probably something you're facing, but not the audience that you assume would be facing it as facing. In many cases, if they're facing that problem, they've already found some hackish solution that works, and your solution is not 10x better. And all of these are sort of rules. And of course, as I said, for me, there have been mistakes I've learned along the way, but there are also rules that, one of the things we we kind of frequently talk about in our product team is like we should catch every product manager and tattoo on the inside of their eyelids that you are not the customer, because this is one of the biggest mistakes, biggest fallacies that most product managers carry. It's like, oh yeah, I want this feature, but the de facto is like, oh, this feature will be great, or this product will be great. And so really it's going out there using conventional standard tools like prototyping, using sort of online ads, using customer surveys, talking to customers to figure out and validate some of those, hypotheses. And whether you do it for an entire product before you start developing an MVP, or around the time you're developing an MVP, or whether you do it with each feature, we kind of follow that validation process. But yeah, I don't have a ready framework. I'm just saying that as long as you get sufficient conviction that your target persona has the problem and your solution is 10x better. I keep saying this 10x better piece also, by the way, because you'll find that people who have problems, if your solution is 20% better or 30% better, you're not going to get them to switch from whatever. They might still be doing it a crappy way, but you're not going to get them to easily switch. So you have to be substantially better. And I can again talk about each of these who have made mistakes at every step of the way. So when I've found products that have, a good problem statement and I have a brilliant solution, but there's no way to get to those customers. They might be impossible to get to in a revenue net positive way. So you do have to address some of these in pre-discovery stage, and you need to develop your own approach. I just generally open up a Google Doc and start typing notes and collecting information along with my product team and analysts to eventually develop a conviction around all of them.
Yeah, I think just to add in there, I think, actually most of the time you're not creating a brand new product every time. You are changing and adapting. So, we've very much got a successful recipe and cake, and we're adding complementary products to that. So in terms of pre-discovery, I think, for us, certainly, the pre-discovery was done 20 years ago, so I can't even remember what that looks like. Now it's saying, well, okay, this is a really good cake that we've got. Let's add this, let's change this, let's adapt this for the market, and we spin off another sub-product there. But essentially, they should be very complementary to the core business that you want to run. Of course, there's got to be a lot of analytical work for your core product, but really, beyond that, it's adapting and being agile to what the customer needs for sub-products, sort of thing.
Amazing. Hey, thank you guys so much. I think we're coming to time, but I think from listening to you in this chat, I think the main takeaway for everyone is to obsess over the customer. So put the customer first and really build something of value to them. But thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Cheers, Bhavin. Cheers, Phil.
Thanks, Phil. Lovely to meet you.
I would like to now bring on stage the CEO and founder of Superhuman, Rahul Vohra. He'll be joining us all the way from San Francisco.
Hello, hello. How is everybody?
Rahul, welcome to our London stage. We also have some people joining us from around the world, but now with virtual events, it's much easier. I have to say that you also sound very British. Are you from the islands originally?
I am indeed from the islands, and I've grown up in perhaps any number of different cities in the UK. Gosh, at last count, Birmingham, Manchester, Cambridge, lots of Scotland. So I have this kind of average British accent that I've somewhat retained, having lived here in California for about 10 years now.
Very good to hear it, especially because we are doing Startup Guide in London and in the UK. Rahul, I would like to jump in and ask you about your previous experience, because I have seen a few talks and heard a few podcasts with you, and I have to say that I'm super excited to have you on stage, because there is a wealth of wisdom which you collected over the years, especially because you don't settle for simple solutions, but you also dig in much deeper into problems. Can you please quickly tell us about your first entrepreneurial experience, which is the one from Rapportive? Because at the time, there was no ecosystem around plugins of Google Chrome and so on. So please tell us, how did this happen?
Sure. Well, to understand how it happens, you really have to go back to the very beginning. I've been programming since I was about 8 years old. This was primarily because both my parents were doctors, in fact. And so they would pick me up late from school. And as I was waiting to be picked up, I would hang out in the library. And once I'd worked my way through the fiction books, I started on the non-fiction books. And the books on computer programming really caught my attention. And I thought, I could do this. I could make computers do things. And so I programmed a lot for many hours every single day. And by the time I was 15, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to build beautiful things that made people smile. So I went to Cambridge, I studied computer science, and I started about 6 different startups, almost all of which failed. And my first big break was, as you said, Rapportive, which I started actually when I was still in Cambridge. And for those that don't remember, we built the first Gmail plugin to scale to millions of users. It showed you everything about your contacts right inside your inbox. When people emailed you, we showed you what they looked like, where they worked, their recent tweets, and links to their social profiles. We grew real fast, and less than 2 years later, we were acquired by LinkedIn. And that kind of directly leads to today, where I'm the founder and CEO of Superhuman, where we make the fastest email experience in the world. And today, our customers get through their inbox twice as fast as before, and many of them see inbox zero for the first time in years.
That's true. Now, when you look at the Rapportive experience, which led to this journey of Superhuman, tell us about how did this exit into LinkedIn came about?
Great question. It happened like most exits tend to happen. So it started with a BD deal. The way that began was I was in Y Combinator. We did Y Combinator in the summer of 2010. And I remember doing our pitch. And afterwards, I wasn't even trying to raise money because we'd raised money beforehand. But afterwards, Emily Choi, who was running corporate development at LinkedIn at that time, came up to us and said, "Hey, what you're doing is really cool. You should definitely come in at some point and talk to us about it." And I didn't really think much more about her invitation. But I circled back about 2 or 3 months later. I went in, I met the head of product, who at that time was Adam Nash, who later became the CEO of Wealthfront. He now runs products at Dropbox. And he and I really hit it off. And I explained my vision for, well, wouldn't it be amazing if you could send LinkedIn connections right from your inbox? And I had prototyped this, I demoed it. We had the Rapportive sidebar on the right-hand side, and I showed what a little connect button would look like and how awesome that would be. And to my great surprise, he said, yes, let's do this. And so he gave me access to this API, which very few companies had access to. And then a few months later still, we got access to almost the holy grail of APIs. I think there was only at most 20 companies that ever had access to this one. And that was the ability to send LinkedIn a hashed email address and get back the full profile, which ultimately ended up powering all of Rapportive's data and was just this incredible competitive advantage. And so with that, we scaled to millions of users. We had the best product in the market. No one could really compete. And at around 2 years in, LinkedIn actually heard on the grapevine that we were about to raise our Series A. And we were about to get a term sheet from Greylock and a few other wonderful venture capital firms. And so they very quietly reached out and said, well, hey, there is this other path. How about you come into LinkedIn, we'll buy the company, you'll get to join this company that's just gone IPO, that has amazing growth prospects, and you get to share your vision, not just with what a startup can market to, but with 250 million plus members. How does that sound? And you know what? It sounded pretty good. So we ended up taking that direction.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you, how did you go from the journey of Rapportive into Superhuman? What made you think that the email experience is so broken that it needs to be fixed?
Oh boy. Okay, that's a good question. So at Rapportive, we had kickstarted this whole ecosystem of Gmail plugins. And at LinkedIn, we ran the company's email integrations. And during those 4 years, I developed a very intimate view of email. I could see Gmail getting worse every single year, becoming more cluttered, using more memory, consuming more CPU, slowing down your machine, and still not working properly offline. And on top of this, people were installing plugins like ours, Rapportive, but also Boomerang, Mixmax, Clearbit, you name it, they had it. And each plugin took these problems, clutter, memory, CPU performance offline, and made all of them dramatically worse. So we decided it was time for change. We imagined an email experience that is blazingly fast, where search is instantaneous, where every interaction is 100 milliseconds or less. An experience where you never had to touch the mouse, where you could do everything from the keyboard and fly through your inbox. An experience that just worked offline, so you could be productive from anywhere, and an experience, of course, that had the best Gmail plugins built in natively, and yet somehow was subtle, minimal, and visually gorgeous. And so with that, we built Superhuman. And today our customers end up getting to their inbox about twice as fast as before, and many of them see inbox 0 for the first time in years.
Rahul, the fixing of the email experience it sounds like a big task, because it's it's usually controlled by incumbents, and as our speakers before, Bhavin and Phil mentioned, you need to go after something which needs to be fixed, and email is by default present in every laptop, in every mobile, in every smartphone. Why did you think that you can make it work also business-wise? What was your original idea about what was the right business model you were going after?
Well, it's pretty simple. No one I ever met when I was doing customer interviews and before Superhuman could genuinely tell me, I love my email. Like it wasn't true. And in that first year of Superhuman, I interviewed over 1,000 potential customers. Now, not in the way that you might think, because you've got just north of 300 days in the year. 1,000 customers is between 2 and 3 customers a day. That's working weekends as well. So how did we do this? Well, we put up a landing page. We created buzz around the company. For example, when Mailbox shut down, I wrote a really cool evergreen piece on how to survive an M&A acquisition and my experience with Rapportive at LinkedIn. That drove north of 10,000 signups to our website. We had a whole bunch of press alongside that as well. And here's the trick. Whenever anybody signed up, they would receive an email from me. Now, this was an automated email, but ostensibly it looked like it was from me. And I would ask 2 questions. Number 1, what do you use for email today? And number 2, what are your pet peeves about it? And some percentage of users would reply. And when they replied, I would reply also. And I would dig in. So they might say something like, hey, I use Gmail, or hey, I use Airmail, or I use Spark. And without fail, I found a consistent pattern. The consistent pattern was that literally nobody loved Gmail anymore. People were either neutral or they hated it. And when they didn't like it, the reasons why they didn't like it were always consistent. Gmail is too slow. I spend too much time in my email. It doesn't do the things I need it to do. I have to add all these extensions just to make it a worthy professional email client. And for some bizarre reason, it still doesn't work offline. And on the third-party email client front, the Airmails and the Sparks and even the mail apps and so on, it was, again, the same. Nobody loved these tools. They were neutral or they more often disliked it. But the reasons were different. The reasons were this is too slow, or it doesn't sync properly, or it's really buggy, it's unstable, it's unreliable. And so what we thought is, well, all right, it's going to be really hard. But what if we combined these 2 things? What if we made an email experience that's blazingly fast, directly taking head-on the core complaints of both of the other 2 platforms, but was also really reliable, and it also synced really well, and it also didn't require a bunch of plugins to do the things that people wanted it to do. And it was just, magically vertically integrated. I likened the email experience that Gmail provided with the browser extension ecosystem a little bit like Android. It's got a lot of different people in that community, everyone from Samsung to Huawei to HTC to Google to every random person making apps. That's Android. And then there's Apple, who make the iPhone, and they control the entire ecosystem all the way from the hardware through the software. And I thought, well, maybe we can do something like that. Maybe we can build a vertically integrated, visually gorgeous, blazingly fast email experience. And that's what we went ahead and did.
So Rahul, you're mentioning these features which seem to be important for you at the beginning. So it's the speed, it's the ease of use. I've been through this experience myself about 10 years ago when I used to work for it's almost 15 years ago now. I used to work for Orange, and mobile phones were kind of okay, but Steve Jobs thought otherwise. He wanted to fix them, and that's why they did the iPhone. And this is a very hard. It's an easier game for a company like Apple, but for a startup like yours, like Superhuman, it's very hard to go after these big incumbents. What made you think you can succeed? Was it the early feedback you got from users?
I actually hold the opposite opinion. I think it is easier to go after incumbents, and I know we're going to talk about this later. But when I look at potential angel investment opportunities, I like those companies that are going after incumbents. And there's a very set of specific reasons why. And number one, incumbents struggle to compete along certain very specific dimensions. The first dimension is speed. It's very, very difficult, let's take Google for example, to make Gmail anywhere near as fast as Superhuman. Why? Because they have number one, massive scale, number two, entrenched architecture, and number three, a massive audience. So someone using Gmail might be on an extremely low power device that barely has the computation power of that phone that you mentioned from 10 years ago. But I know that the people who are using Superhuman, they all have relatively high-end laptops, and they are all also the kind of people who really appreciate speed. So we can do things like build hybrid software. Our software does not run on the servers. It, to my knowledge, is the first email client written entirely in JavaScript, and that's how we can unlock that kind of speed. It would be unthinkable for Google to build something like that. The second thing is, for the same set of reasons, or very similar set of reasons, incumbents can't really compete on design. If you take Gmail again as an example, 1.5 billion users. A question that I like to ask our candidates when they come to our interviews is, what do you think the average number of emails a Gmail user receives is? And they typically say 100 or 200, but that's not true. The average number of emails that a typical Gmail user receives per day, emails that they actually have to do something about, is 5. So imagine being the product manager at Gmail trying to make something that works for that, as well as for our user base, who receives hundreds, if not thousands of emails a day and sends many hundreds of emails a day. It just doesn't work. And so because of that, and because they have a large, complex, somewhat political hierarchy, it's very difficult for a company like Google to focus in on a profitable niche like we do. And the third and final thing is scale. Google have actually tried to innovate on email. They've tried really hard and they did really well. Inbox at its peak, I believe, had more than 500 million users, 500 million plus users, and yet they turned it off. Why? Because at Google scale, that's still considered failure. Where on the scale of any startup that would be considered a runaway success would probably be $1 billion company all by itself. And so this is why I like going into spaces that are typically dominated by incumbents. I don't really think it's going after the incumbents. It's really just slicing off a profitable segment. You take Superhuman as an example, $30 a month. With just 300,000 subscribers, we'll be making $100 million a year. We'll be $1 billion company. I can't imagine Google ever thinking 300,000 subscribers for anything would be success.
You have a point there, that's for sure. Now, you are a believer in this contrarian space. Let's discuss how it was for you at the beginning with fundraising. Did you aim for angels immediately, or you wanted to fund it yourself and decided to wait for the big VCs? How did you go about fundraising?
Great question. So at this point, we've raised north of $51 million over 4 rounds. It was a pre-seed, seed, Series A, Series B. And the pre-seed strategy was pretty simple. Rapportive made decent money for its investors. Most investors got 3 to 5x their investment back in a very short space of time, less than 2 years. And one very early investor got 22x their investment. I simply went to those folks and said, hey, I'm starting another company. We're going to build the fastest email experience in the world. It's called Superhuman, and unlike Gmail, folks will love it. I didn't even have a slide deck. All I had was a screenshot of Gmail with the parts I didn't like blocked out in red marker. And yet that pitch essentially raised $1 million overnight. Our first investors were Ed Sim and Elliot Durbin. Huge shout out to those guys from Bold Start Ventures. If you are an enterprise founder, they are by far and away the best first check investor to work with. There is no better first check enterprise founder at that stage. And you asked, did I put any money in myself? This is always a consideration for folks who've sold previous companies, gone through IPOs, been fortunate enough to make some money in the past. The answer is yes. A good rule of thumb is not to do the entire seed round yourself, unless you're obsessed with ownership, in which case, by all means, go ahead and do that. But not to put nothing in at all, because then it looks like you don't have enough skin in the game and you don't care enough about your own company. So a good rule of thumb that I found from talking to various friends and peers is somewhere in the region of 5 to 10%. So I personally contributed around 5 to 10% of our pre-seed round. Now, moving on to the seed stage, I also wanted the best of the best. I wanted a firm that had a big platform, would help their founders in many different ways, would take a board seat, would really roll their sleeves up for the company. And we were focused entirely on, and rather a firm that was focused entirely on the seed stage, so that we had no singling risks, that we had the full set of Series A investors available to us. Now, whilst I was thinking about all of this, our seed round was actually preempted by exactly that kind of firm. First Round Capital, one of the best seed firms in Silicon Valley, caught wind of what we were doing, and a week later they gave us a term sheet for $1.6 million. And Bill Trenchard, legendary investor and one of the first investors in Uber, joined our board. Now, moving forwards again, our Series A was actually preempted as well. Boldstart, our first investor, has an LP that is a very sophisticated, large family office, and this LP had actually invested in us not just via Boldstart, but actually via quite a few different funds. And they could see what we were building from all the LP updates, and sure enough, they one day reached out and they said, hey, we'd like to preempt your Series A. And I named our terms, and we very quickly struck a deal for $10 million. And we immediately started to pour that money into building the best product possible. And then moving forwards, just to the round that we did last year, the Series B, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I knew that we were entering a very, very difficult phase of building the company. That journey from 1 million of ARR to 10 million or more is widely considered to be the hardest part. So I looked for partners who had great platforms, who were previously founders and CEOs, and who had a huge amount of experience helping founders navigate this very tricky stage. Now, this was a very intense fundraising experience. We ended up with 7 term sheets in 10 days. I didn't sleep for about 30 days, and we ended up partnering with Andreessen Horowitz. They invested $33 million, and David Ulovich and Mark Andreessen himself actually also both joined our board.
Rahul, tell me, why do you think you had the opposite experience of most startups, that you had, some might say, too many term sheets as opposed to struggling to get one or two? Is it because you are so obsessive about the space which you're going after and everything upside down? Is it because you went to YC? Is it because you had the exit before? Why do you think it all was like a superstorm in the case of Superhuman?
That's a great question. And to be honest, it never really was a superstorm until that Series B phase. The pre-seed, I raised it slowly and gently on my schedule. The same with the seed round, the same with the Series A. They were kind of preempted. It was very quiet. Almost nobody knew that these rounds were happening. And I think actually the general perception in the investor market was that Superhuman is kind of just, petering along. Maybe it's even failing. Who knows? We were just a very, very quiet company. Now for the Series B, yeah.
What was the most common feedback from investors? Why they would be hesitant to believe in Superhuman at the beginning?
At which stage?
At the early stage, like pre-seed, seed.
Okay, great. Okay, fine. At the pre-seed stage, the biggest question was, why would anyone ever pay for email? This sounds insane. And actually, that, truth be told, that has been the main concern that investors have had all the way along, which was, why would anyone pay for email when Gmail is free and Outlook largely feels free because your company buys it for you?
Yeah.
And what I said was, hey, you got to trust me. Can anyone you think say they love email? Probably not. And there's something there. And I think now we've proven that people actually will pay for email. I just had this, I had this belief based on how I personally felt. This is actually in direct contradiction to the previous session. They were like, tattoo the inner eyelids of your product managers. You are not the user. Well, God damn it, I am the user. And I know, and I would pay for email because my time is worth way more than the $30 per month that it costs to buy Superhuman. And I know that there's millions of people, if not tens of millions of people like me in the US alone. And so for me, it was just self-evident and obvious.
Okay, I want to ask you about features and product and how you designed it. So you knew what are the key pain points of the incumbent solutions. Now, what would you say you have learned from the incumbent players about email, which works, which you wanted to use in Superhuman, and what did you want to add on top of that?
Okay, so 2 things. Number 1, we learned that our competition is not other email startups. Our target market is quite unlikely to be using an email client by another startup. Instead, they are overwhelmingly likely to be using Gmail or Outlook. And so it doesn't actually hugely matter what other startups do. As Paul Graham is famous for saying, competition doesn't kill startups. Other things kill startups, like running out of money or time or co-founder squabbles. So what matters most to us is what the incumbents in our space do. That's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, we learned that you cannot stay still. I think there is this misconception actually that Google and Microsoft aren't doing anything with their products. That's not true at all. They have hundreds, if not thousands of people working on these products, and they are constantly innovating. And there can be this temptation as a startup founder, when something is taking off, it's working, and the graph's going up and to the right, there can be this temptation to say, hey, we're done with email. Let's move on to something else. Let's do tasks or calendar or whatever it is. But this is almost certainly a terrible idea because the incumbents are going to keep on making their email experience better. It's not as if they're going to stop. Now, today, our email experience is the best email experience, but we have to keep on investing to keep it that way. And so the second lesson is we've learned to keep on investing in our products, no matter how good we think it is.
There's a question here on Slido for you, and just want to know how deciding between adding new features versus making existing features better. And right now, Superhuman will be a kind of a mature product at the very least. When you're deciding about priorities, what are you going for? Improving or adding or removing?
Wonderful question. Thank you so much. This is largely addressed by my product market fit engine. If you haven't come across this, highly recommend you check it out. Google for Superhuman product market fit engine. And it creates this whole algorithm, a framework for generating your roadmap to answer this very question. So long story short, I'm happy to go into it if we want to. We are constantly trying to increase the percentage of people who love Superhuman, who would be very disappointed without Superhuman. And sometimes that means building new things, new shiny things in the vein of all of the shiny cool stuff that we have, more cool features that other email clients don't have, doubling down on speed, keyboard shortcuts, aesthetics. And sometimes it means taking existing features that every email client has, like search, and polishing it just a little bit more so we can continually widen our market and spread beyond early adopters into the mass market and beyond. And so it is truly a constant balance between these things. There is no correct answer. We go into every quarter thinking we'll spend roughly half our time on one and half our time on the other. And then we tweak it one way or the other, depending on what we feel our priorities are for that quarter.
Are you a fan of adding features only after removed existing ones, or are you okay with adding slightly more and knowing that people will get used to them?
I think we can do a better job at removing features. I think there is this very sensible, actually, philosophy that goes around in product circles, which is you should be removing features just as much as you're adding them. I do think that's true. I think the hard thing about it is it does take efforts to remove features. It's not free. It does take engineering work to take them out. Other things will break. There will be bugs. And so it's not as easy as just selecting a bunch of code and deleting it. We have removed some features in the past, and I think we're going to start doing this more and more just to keep the product conceptually simple and the code base tractable. And so that is definitely something that we can get better at.
Let me think in terms of the future potential development of a product like Superhuman, which I'm a big fan of, and I'm a user now. 5 years from now, are you a believer email is always going to be text-based, or do you think it's going to be evolving into more voice-based when the UI is going to get better? What is your opinion?
I think that's a fascinating question. So a few different things for the process of email over time. I think that number one, you're going to see a lot more writing assistants essentially come into email. And this will go beyond Gmail's Smart Reply and autocomplete. Imagine waking up one day to an inbox where every single email in your inbox has a draft pre-written for you. And all you have to do is come in, edit a few words, and hit send. It sounds like science fiction, but I do think we will get there. So that's sort of one area of innovation. Another area of innovation that I think we'll see is a lot more collaboration. Now, Superhuman deliberately has focused on productivity, the single-player aspect of getting stuff done. We've deliberately not focused on multiplayer and collaboration because I think that when companies go after collaboration without thinking about productivity, without doing it first, what they end up with is a product that people use not because they individually want to use it, but because their manager says so, or because their teammates say so. And that's just philosophically not the kind of software that me or any of my teammates want to build. We want to build stuff that people want to use because they really love using it for themselves. And I think it's a natural segue, a natural 1-2 from productivity into collaboration. So I think you'll see a lot more collaboration, innovation over the next few years in the space of email, things like assigning tasks, delegating tasks, collaboratively editing emails, sharing templates. There's all kinds of different things that you could do when you make email multiplayer. And the third thing is, it's really where you were going, which is, what does email look like in the future? Is it going to be voice-based? I don't think so, actually. I think that the voice modality works really, really well in certain contexts. Alexa, for example, Google Home, that the simple query, what's the weather like outside? Do I have any packages on the way? Simple stuff like that, which it doesn't feel awkward to ask the thing sitting in your kitchen this question because it's your kitchen. No one's really listening to you. But you know what? It still feels awkward and still will for some time to talk to your laptop in the way that you talk to Alexa or to Google Home. What is happening, and I think this is an unstoppable trend, is that our email messages are becoming shorter, we're becoming less formal. We no longer write them as if they are letters. Dear Marion, how are you? I hope you're well. I hope the family's doing well. We used to do that. That used to be the way that we wrote emails as if they were letters, but we're becoming increasingly informal. In other words, email is becoming like chat. And we can see that now that 50% of all the emails that we send and receive are essentially one-liners. And I wouldn't be surprised if in 5 years from now, email becomes messaging.
Interesting. Okay, we have another question here from Slido. Sean wants to know, being so product focused, how have you structured your product team as you've grown?
Okay, great question. So we're still pretty small. There's me. I haven't hired a head of product, so I am the head of product. And we have 2 full-time product managers, one on the senior end, one who would be an associate product manager, so first or second year out of school. Both of them, however, are incredible, have this incredible depth of knowledge and ability and complement each other exceptionally well. One does incredibly well at the process side of things, the consensus building, the stakeholder management, getting things shipped on time, which, by the way, is not easy. It's really hard, especially when you have to wrangle an entire company. We're about 51 people right now. And the other sort of grew up with more on the art of making products, what feels good, what looks good, where should the pixels be, how should things play out. And that would be my advice to anyone building a product team is there's really these 2 different disciplines of product, and you very quickly want to pair them. It doesn't really matter which way around you do them, but you do need both of them, and you need both of them fairly quickly. So that's how we've focused our product team. Actually, one more thing to add to that. Product management, marketing as well is built into that team. One of those 2 folks does that. That would probably be my third person to bring on is to separate that out.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned also marketing. You are very data-driven founder. I would like to understand better, how did you go about setting up the price? Did you test multiple price points? And how did you end up on the number 30 per month?
Yeah, good question. So I actually don't think I'm a very data-driven founder. I was having this debate with my board the other day, and they were like, the interesting thing about you is you seem to be one of the most balanced founders in our portfolio. You've got this balance between left brain and right brain. So I actually feel like I'm very intuitive. I'm not sure if I would say I'm super data-driven. But okay, so your question was about positioning, or rather about pricing. But I think, I get asked this question a lot. I would always start with positioning. So just give me a second to gather my thoughts, because this is one of those things where it's a really meaty topic, and I want to make sure that we can get into this as detailed as I know that the audience would like. So just give me a second here. Okay. So the first thing I would say is, before you start to address your pricing, you really have to address your positioning. And that's because if you don't know what your positioning is, whether it's premium or value or middle of the road, you can't really have any kind of intuition or any kind of approach to your pricing. And so we actually started by working with Ariel Jackson. Ariel Jackson, we met through first round capital. She was on retainer with them to help their startups, and the best possible person in the world to work with, because she was actually the first product marketing manager at Google to launch Gmail. So she'd launched an email product before. And we met up with her, and she referred us to her article, Positioning How to Nail It. It's on First Round Review if you want to find it. And she advised a kind of Mad Libs fill-in-the-blanks exercise, which is for some kind of audience, your product, which exists in a category that has some kind of primary feature or benefits, unlike the competition, has this differentiation. And we went through this exercise. We came up with the Superhuman positioning, which is for founders, executives, and managers of high-growth technology companies. Superhuman is the fastest email experience ever made. Unlike Gmail, which was built 15 years ago, Superhuman is meticulously crafted, so every interaction happens in 100 milliseconds or less. And we've since expanded from that tightly defined positioning, but you really do need to start as tightly as that to make it extremely clear. And when you have that positioning, you can then start to sort of feel your way around it. For example, are we the Ford of email? Probably not. Are we the Tesla of email? Yeah, I think that's getting there. Are we the Mercedes or are we the BMW of email? Yeah, this starts to feel right. Now, when you have that feel for what your positioning is, you can then start to address pricing. And the best resource for this, by the way, is a book called Monetizing Innovation by Madhavan Ramanujan. It's really, really good. Highly, highly recommend checking it out. And there's lots of ways you can do pricing. One of the simplest and fastest is the Van Westendorp pricing sensitivity meter. And this is where you ask your customers 4 very simple questions. Number one, at what price would this be so expensive that you would not buy it? Number two, at what price would this be so cheap that you would be concerned as to its quality and you still also wouldn't buy it? Number three, at what price would this be expensive? So you'd have to think about it, but you would still actually buy it. And number four, at what price point would this be a bargain for the money? Now, what you do is you survey your users, you can plot these on a graph, you can look at the intersections. Most startups actually orient around question number four. Why? Because most startups are actually going into a new market. There usually isn't an existing solution, and they usually aren't building a premium solution. So what they end up positioning at is a sort of bargain value for the money so they can get all the customers, all the users as fast as possible. But sometimes you're going into the market with a premium solution. This is especially true, especially common if you're going into a market where there are incumbents. Like for us, there's Gmail, of course, there's Outlook. One can imagine that Tesla did this with their Model S and with their Roadster. Mirror did it with their device. Peloton did it with their piece of hardware. You go in with the third question, which is how much would, at what price would this be so expensive that you'd have to think about it, but you'd still actually buy it? Now, for us, the median answer to that question was $29 per month. We then spoke with several pricing experts who pointed out that you probably shouldn't end a premium product with 9, because 9 signals a value, not premiumness. And so we rounded it up to 30, and that's how we came to the price point of 30. And then the final step, you shouldn't just stop at that point. The final step is to do a gut check on your TAM, your market size, or not even your TAM, just like your possible market size. And the way that I like to do this is, well, we're venture-backed, so we really want to be a billion-dollar company and beyond. We want to be a multi-billion-dollar company. To be a billion-dollar company, we need to have a run rate, roughly, let's say, of $100 million per year. At $30 per month, that's 300,000 subscribers. We asked ourselves, do we think it's feasible to get to 300,000 subscribers? Like I said, I think there are tens of millions of people in the US who could buy this. So we answered emphatically yes, and we went ahead with that price. So zooming out, step number 1 is positioning. Step number 2 is pricing, and you can use the Van Westendorp meter. And then step number 3 is that gut sense on market size.
Great. Rahul, I think the moment you write a book, I'm going to be the first one to buy it, and it's a nice example of how to structurally go and build a company. Now, you are probably most known for custom onboarding, which is probably the world class in your case. And before we jump in and discuss that, I want to ask you about if you can remember, what was the lowest point, the hardest point at Superhuman so far?
Yeah, so I think our deepest low point so far, folks may remember this, was the controversy we went through last year regarding read statuses. So for those that don't know, read statuses, they're a power user feature that they show you when people open your emails. Some products also show an approximate sense of location, city, country, based on the IP address, standard geolocation stuff. Now, read statuses work using a tracking pixel, and this isn't, the email tool in this case includes a tiny image in sent messages, and when recipients open these, the email client will download the image in exactly the same way that the web browser does. And this is very similar to how Google Analytics tracks visits, both how often visitors arrive and approximately where they come from. Now, it's a very common feature in email products. It's built into tools that we all use, like Mixmax, Yesware, Streak, and every single email sending platform. But because Superhuman was beginning to attract a lot of media attention, and in that same month, for example, we were on the front page of the New York Times, we were in The Economist, we were in The Guardian, our read statuses also began to attract a lot of criticism. Now, in particular, we saw 4 criticisms of read statuses. Number 1, location could potentially be misused by a bad actor. Number 2, read statuses are on by default. Number 3, recipients cannot opt out. Number 4, our users actually couldn't disable remote image loading. And it was hard. You know, I had so much criticism. Like, imagine every single media publication expressing everything from discontent through to outrage. So firstly, I resisted the urge to respond immediately. And this was extremely hard. It's natural to feel angry, to want to defend yourself, to explain how, you know, all you're doing is giving customers what they want. Isn't that what we're meant to do as entrepreneurs? And especially when every other email company is doing the same thing. But I tried hard, I meditated, I resisted, I stayed quiet. And secondly, I took 48 hours to think it through. I read everything multiple times. I deeply considered all the points that were being made. And thirdly, I decided what changes we were going to make and then published them. And we did the following things. We, number 1, immediately deleted all location data. We stopped logging location information. Number 2, we turned the read status feature off by default. Users today have to turn it on explicitly. And number 3, we built the option to disable remote image loading. And on reflection, my mistake was focusing only on the needs and wants of our customers, which, you know, in a startup show, maybe that sounds crazy to say. And it's exactly the right thing to do in the early stages of a startup. And I don't want folks on the audience to take the wrong lesson, because if you don't do that, you shortly won't have a startup. But now I see that every startup at some point also has to grow up. At a certain point, every startup needs to consider not just their own customers, but also the people they communicate with, also the wider ecosystem, indeed the internet at large. We all share that responsibility, and we all at some point have to grow into it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Now, you know, Superhuman is really legendary for custom onboarding, and it all started, you know, in the marketing space, especially in digital marketing. Lots of companies are using this waiting list as a marketing gimmick in most cases. And the more I dug deeper into how Superhuman is doing it, apparently it's not the case for you. And because you just want to make sure the customers use it the way they need to, and also you want customers that want to use the product for long term, not for a few weeks and then go away. Now, can you please explain to us how did the custom onboarding evolve over time at Superhuman? Because I'm sure you wanted to be on those calls at the beginning, and now as the customer scale, you don't have so much time. How does it happen today compared to how it was at the beginning?
Sure. Okay, so this is going to be a meaty answer. Everyone, strap in, buckle up. So for those that don't know, every single new user, we do a live concierge onboarding. This is a 30-minute one-to-one video call with one of our wonderful onboarding specialists. And in these onboardings, we teach faster workflows to get to inbox zero. We teach powerful shortcuts so you never have to touch the mouse. And if you're very, very far away from inbox zero, as many of our customers actually are, they often come to us with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of emails in their inbox. We wipe the slate clean so that you're within a stone's throw of hitting inbox 0. So for founders considering onboarding, I would do it in 4 discrete phases. And at the same time, I'll walk us through how I did this, so hopefully people can copy it and do the same. Now, in phase 1, the founder takes the lead. In this phase, one of the founders, and this should be the product founder, who, by the way, is ideally the CEO, should do the onboardings. Now, the goal of this phase is to test whether the company is even ready to start doing onboardings. The assumption is that of all the people in the company, the product founder should be able to do them the best. After all, they hold the most integrated view and should have a wide range of skills across sales, active listening, and user experience design. Now, I did the first several hundred onboardings for Superhuman myself, and in this phase, I would not be too concerned with how long the onboardings take. In fact, I would often take up to 2 hours. Now, each onboarding had about 5 or 6 different parts. First, I would start off by giving a demo of Superhuman and sharing all of the things that make it magical and delightful. Second, I would remind the person that Superhuman is indeed a paid product. And that was actually when I would quickly measure price sensitivity using the Van Westendorp methodology. Third, I would then ask the person how they do that email. And I would take a note of all the Superhuman features that I would want to show them. Fourth, I would then show them how to get through that email in Superhuman, but twice as fast as they were doing before. Fifth, I would then insist that they would do their email with me for about half an hour. Now, this part is crucial because every single time I would find 5 to 10 bugs. I would then take these bugs back to the team and insist that we fix them for next week. Because imagine if we did not fix the bugs. Next week, those exact same issues would be reported and we would not learn anything new. But if we did fix the bugs, then next week we'd be able to learn about the next set of issues. And then sixth, and finally, I would always love to give that person a gift to thank them for their time. I'd often leave a bottle of whiskey, a special wine, or some other thoughtful gift. Now, during phase 1, you should be collecting data on how these users are doing. What is their engagement? What is their retention, their product market fit score, their NPS, their virality? And we found that for all these metrics, we were beating industry benchmarks to the point where we were category leading. So I ramped to 5 or 6 onboardings like this myself per week. And if, after you've done around 200 onboardings, you have great metrics, then you know that onboarding could work for your company, and you're ready to move to phase 2.
Okay, Rahul, now the customer onboarding brings you interesting data points. How important it is for you as a CEO to kind of get the market feel of how your users are developing? Do you feel like Superhuman is now opening up to new customer segments? I'm sure at the beginning it was mostly about the early adopters. Do you feel like you want to expand to the wider market? And how important is it for you to kind of get the feedback from the market directly and have the customer access?
I think it's really important for the product leader to remain in touch. And there's a few ways that I do that. We receive tremendous amounts of customer feedback, north of 2,000 emails every single week from our customers about the product's feedback, things they love, challenges they're having. And I used to read every single one. That's obviously not feasible anymore. It takes a pretty large team of people to get through them all and to respond quickly. So what I do is I read a sample of those emails, created reporting and dashboarding structures so I can get a sense of what's going on. We have a thing called a delight pulse, so our delight team, which by the way is what we call our support team, because they're really there to delight our customers. They send out a pulse every week with what the latest themes are from our customers. And I still personally am the face of the company on Twitter, so it's very easy to find me. My DMs are open. By the way, if you want early access to Superhuman, I can help jump you to the top of the list. Feel free to DM me on Twitter or to send me an email, rahul@superhuman.com. And it's exactly that kind of sentence I just said that keeps me in touch with customers and with potential customers. I still remain in the trenches, as it were, talking to people, because the day you stop doing that is the day you start losing your sense for what people truly want.
Okay, so about 5 minutes left. Let's jump into some questions from customers. We have a question here from Ed on Slido. Rich wants to know which accelerator features should a founder prioritize. So you mentioned being through YC, Y Combinator. And when you attend an accelerator, what kind of features were key for you at the time? and what would you recommend today, looking back?
You know, this really depends on the startup. Rapportive had a very unusual journey because Rapportive, and this is kind of startup history, I don't imagine too many people remember this, but we had accidentally launched before we even got to Y Combinator, before the program started. So the main benefit of Y Combinator, which is we will help you raise your seed round and increase the valuation and bring you the best investors and all of those kinds of things, just didn't really apply to us anymore. Because by the time the program had started, I'd already raised $1 million. And so for us, the value that we were trying to get out of it was a little bit different. How do we hire? How do we continue building towards product market fit? How do we scale? How do we get more users? And we spent most of our office hours and our time with the partners going after those questions. So I think it really depends what the main needs of your company are. But for the average startup, I would say focus on the things that the partners can get you. And those typically are raising money from the best investors at the best possible valuation, although not too high. You don't want to screw yourselves over, number one. And number two, getting the best possible press for your companies that you can get. A lot of the folks who are partners at the various accelerators are very well connected to the press and can help you get that TechCrunch review or perhaps even into a more widely read piece of journalism.
So useful tips, thank you. Another question from Laura. Laura wants to know, in the past, you have integrated a tool perfectly in your life. A large company buys it and kills it. How do you feel about that?
I actually feel fine. Rapportive had a really great run. We sold the company, or started the company in 2010. It survived and was sort of a cult phenomenon until actually just earlier this year, March of 2020. So it survived for 10 full years. About halfway through that period, it was rebranded LinkedIn Sales Navigator, which again is fine. This is just the life cycle of a company. And I think there are very few founders, there are very few teams that can say, yeah, we made a product and it lasted for 10 years and it was beloved for 10 years. And in our case, it was a direct segue into this thing that we're building today. And it's actually the same team going after it. My CTO and co-founder today, Conrad Owen, was our first employee at Rapportive. And it's really exciting to see that evolution and that journey. So, back in the day, I think it would have felt bittersweet. At this point, I have a very zen approach to this and just appreciate it's the natural evolution of things.
Yeah, fair enough. Next question from Luca. It actually links to what I wanted to ask you regarding the way you're using this waiting list now. And Luca, I want to know, how do you have an in-house sales team? And if so, how do you structure it? Or you don't, and you just kind of rely on the waiting list and you have enough customers on there. What's your way of dealing with sales? Do you just rely on inbound, or you also have an outbound sales team?
We rely on inbound. We do not do any outbound. We don't have a sales team. It's not clear to me when we will do that. I think it's inevitable at some point every company will start doing this. But today, Superhuman is a product that is bought, not sold. So people come to us via referral, they come to us via word of mouth, they come to us via press, they come to us via content that we write. For example, my product market fit piece, which everyone here should read if you haven't yet. It's probably one of the most helpful things I can share with you. So there's a lot of different things that we do that bring customers to us, but we have yet to set up a sales team.
Oh, that's fair enough. Now, there is last question here, which I also saw on Slido, and Luke wants to know, what's your biggest challenge at Superhuman today?
Biggest challenge? Okay, let's see. I'm going to have to think about this. I'm going to put this back to the audience. Do you mean my biggest challenge personally as a CEO, or do you mean the company's biggest challenge? Let's get some more clarification on that question.
For example, yeah, maybe you can zoom it into the company culture, because recently I also signed Superhuman. I wanted to know and have the experience. So far I love it, and I spoke to a few colleagues of yours independently, and I feel like these people are very passionate about every single element of the company. Do you find maintaining the culture is a challenge for you as you grow, or it is easy for you to kind of keep the friendliness of the company and the customer-centric approach as you grow?
So far, so good. Fingers crossed. We've done a great job, and I'm glad, so happy to hear that you had that experience with our customers, or with our team. Most companies actually get this wrong, so maybe what I can helpfully share is how we did it and make this super tactical for everybody listening. So our culture is really driven by our values, and in order to preserve your culture as you grow, you really need to hire for those values, and you need to instill them over time. And I think that most companies take a few iterations to get their values right. They often write down vague concepts that are basically table stakes, like "let's be good," or I don't know. I can't even think of these terrible values, but you know them when you see them. You're just like, does that even mean anything? It sounds so vague and abstract. And in particular, they don't really differentiate themselves from any other company, and that differentiation turns out to be key. So to avoid this, we went through a fantastic process from the book The Advantage by Patrick Leoncini. It's an incredible book on how to run a company and how to run a really great management team. And in this book, the author introduces the idea of core values, and even better, gives you an efficient process for identifying them. Now, core values are those which you can credibly claim to uphold more intensely than 99% of all other companies. They're so important that you would continue to uphold them, even if that would be detrimental to your company. Marion, maybe you've experienced this. So for Superhuman, our core values are create delight, be intentional, and remarkable quality. And we're just obsessed with these. And even if it's actually not you might think it's detrimental to the company, we would uphold these nevertheless. Now, create delight is our most important core value. It's our super value, if you will. Superhuman exists to create delight. This stems from my background in game design. And in game design, we define a very specific definition of delight, which is pleasant surprise. Now, imagine a delightful moment you've experienced. It would both have been pleasant to experience and also surprising, and it's that combination that makes it delightful. Now, the next value, and this is actually the one that most startups really struggle with, is to be intentional. Whilst Create Delight talks about what to do, Be Intentional talks about how to do it. Those who know me and those who know the others at Superhuman will know that we are incredibly intentional. We do not act arbitrarily. Instead, we act with reason, thought, and deliberation. And we found that this trait is quite rare, and we really care about it. So we made it a core value, and it's a hiring bar as well. And the last value is, for us, remarkable quality. It is simply not enough to create delight and to do so very deliberately. We also strive for exceptional quality in everything that we do. And so we love to work with people who are excited to produce work that is striking, worthy of attention, and a contribution to the state of the art. And because we only have 3, it's important that there aren't too many. And because we've written down what these things mean, and because my staff, my leadership team, love these values, I built them with the leadership team, they are then able to instill it in the rest of the organization and just sort of becomes central to everything that we do. So that is how we have scaled the company culture so far.
It's a good answer. Now, I would like to thank you for sharing your thoughts, because I honestly think, especially the customer onboarding is world-class knowledge, especially technology companies, and I wonder why not more companies follow your lead on this, because it's usually groundbreaking. So I wish to see more of it. We're gonna follow the journey of Superhuman Shore, and you told us what's the best way to get in touch with you. So you are available on LinkedIn or on Twitter, and usually your email address. Is there anything which we can do to help you and Superhuman?
Let's see. I think I'll turn that right back around and just give something to the community. So we do have, you mentioned the waitlist. We do have a long waitlist. It's over 320,000 people on the waitlist right now. But for the Startup Grind community, I would be more than happy to bump people to the top of that waitlist. So just a few things for people to know if they're interested in getting access to Superhuman. We do not have an Android app right now. It is iOS only. It is Gmail and G Suite only. It does not yet work with Office 365. We are working on both of those things. But if you do hours of email a day, if you're a startup manager, executive founder, or for some other reason you're doing just a lot of email, you use G Suite, you use Gmail, you use iOS, and you want to do it faster, and it's worth enough to you that you'll happily pay $30 a month to save hours per week and to stay at Inbox Zero, then let me know. And what I will do is very happily jump you right to the front of that line, and I'll pair you with one of our best onboarding specialists to get onboarded in the best possible manner. And you'd also get to experience the Superhuman onboarding. I'd be more than happy to do that for the entire community here.
It's very kind of you. Thank you for offering this. We're going to share it with all the attendees by email afterwards. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights. We hope to see more of you in the future. Either it's some of our conferences. We do one, the first one in San Francisco in February. We do one in London. So thank you for being here all the way from the Bay Area.